connected to MIT, really forces for good in a significant way. Thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. This is going to be much more dialogical and conversational, really. I'm not here to pontificate. I don't know that much about the internal dynamics of MIT. If it's in any way similar to Harvard University, then we all got a lot of work to do. Very much so, because this is, like Harvard, one of the great institutions of the American empire. A variety of different viewpoints, visions, voices. That's what liberal education is all about. How do you come to terms with the quest for truth and goodness and beauty in such a way that you can engage in disagreement and still mediate it with respect, but recognize that much is at stake. It's not a game. It's not a puzzle. We're talking about the future and destiny, the species, human beings, sentient beings, and so forth and so on. Now, I know this is Black History Month, and for me, you talk about Black history, you know, you're talking about sacred ground, because you're talking about my mother and my father and my grandparents. And I am who I am because somebody loved me, somebody cared for me, somebody attended to me. Before I arrived at Harvard and Princeton and so forth, I already had folk who had engaged in the shaping of who I am and provided a certain mode of soul craft. The Irene and Clifton West and Shiloh Baptist Church and Reverend Willie P. Cook and Deacon Hinton and Sarah Ray, my Sunday school teacher. I was already fortified before I was then able to study with the Hillary Putnams and the John Rawls and the Robert Nozick's and others in that illustrious philosophy department in the early 70s, and then on to Princeton with Richard Rorty and Sheldon Wolin and Walter Kaufman and Tim Scanlon and Thomas Nagel and Gregory Vlastos. These are all towering figures. They mean the world to me. The Israel Schefflers at Harvard. In fact, when I think about them, I have to just pause. But they're part of the same continuum as my family, my church folk, members of the Black Panther Party. I couldn't join the party because I'm a revolutionary Christian, but they were my comrades. They were radically secular, atheistic to the core, so they could be my allies, but they wouldn't allow me to join, and I can understand that. Everybody's got their dogmatism and provincialism and parochialism. You know, when I arrived here at Harvard, I went straight to Jamaica Plain, where we had the breakfast program for the Black Panther Party, and the prison program at Norfolk, where I taught for every Sunday for the 3 years that I was here. Why is this important? Not because it's about me, but because we live in one of the bleakest moments in the history of this empire. And it's really a testing of who we are, what kind of heart, mind, and souls we really have. It's not just a matter of what we talk about, not just a matter of chit-chat, but what we're willing to risk. What kind of choices we make in such a way that we're willing to actually pay a cost. Antonio Gramsci called it a critical historical self-inventory. But I begin with the legacy of Athens. And Socrates says, the unexamined life is not worth living for a human, at line 38a of Plato's Apology. And I take that very, very seriously. But you can hear echoes in Black History Month to Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living. The examined life is painful. Very, very painful. Montaigne said the philosophizers learn how to die. Seneca says he or she who learns how to die unlearns slavery. See, for me, any serious talk about an educational institution, and I draw a fundamental distinction between what the Greeks call paideia, P-A-I-D-E-I-A. That's deep education. It's very deep and different than cheap schooling. And I know cheap schooling is not what MIT is about. You all about paideia. But all of you about paideia, that learning how to die in order to learn how to live, to engage in that Socratic self-examination, self-interrogation in such a way that you can engage in the formation of attention, attend to the things that really matter and turn your back to those things that are distractions. We live in a culture with massive weapons of distraction. How do you turn away from the superficial things on the surface, deal with life, death, joy, sorrow, justice, trust, those non-market values, those values that are preconditions for markets, but they're also far beyond simply the meritocratic. Because I come from a tradition of a people who, after being terrorized for 400 years, still taught the world so much about freedom. Frederick Douglass could have said, I'm not against slavery per se. I just want to enslave other folk because I don't like being enslaved. No, he wanted freedom for everybody. A certain kind of soul craft. Ida Wells Barnett, when they put the bounty on her head, thousands of dollars, she had to leave the country and go to England fighting against American terrorism called Jim Crow and Jane Crow and lynching. She could have said, I will engage in lynching others who are lynching my friends. No, she said, I was shaped in such a way that I want freedom for everybody. And after 400 years of being chronically and systemically hated, black bodies, black character, black mind, black beauty, hated, demonized, we black folk at our best, we've taught the world so much about how to love. And I could just put on John Coltrane's Love Supreme and just sit down and let you take it in. Listen to those notes. Listen to Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, every note, every silence between the notes. Has there ever been a figure on the stage in this country with more love than Mama, written by a genius in the south side of Chicago named Lorraine Hansberry in her 20s, A Raisin in the Sun? It doesn't take anything away from other towering figures, the Arthur Millers and the Tennessee Williams and Eugene O'Neills, but there's never been that much love on the American stage. Same is true with James Baldwin's love-soaked essay. Same is true with Toni Morrison's Beloved. Same is true with Stevie Wonder. Same is true with Erykah Badu. And Brother Kendrick's working on it, isn't he? Oh, I love that brother. That's Socratic wrestling. Paideia in the sonic mode. Brother Malcolm knows what I'm talking about. It's a blessing to see him. There's two brilliant brothers sitting next to each other at MIT, and his beloved mother's a very distinguished professor as well. But the same tradition, though, Brother Malcolm. You know who you were named after. That Malcolm X, who was a gangster when he was a teenager, a Malcolm Little. But that love transformed him. The love of an honorable Elijah Muhammad transformed him. And what did he do? He shattered his provincialism. He shattered his parochialism. He kept growing. He was Socratic to the core. And he learned how to die in order to learn how to live by scrutinizing himself and allowing, through a formation of attention and the cultivation of a critical self and the maturation of a loving soul, to bear witness, to be a truth teller. And he echoed line 24a of Plato's Apology, where Socrates says what? Parrhesia, Parrhesia. Parrhesia was the cause of my unpopularity. What is parrhesia, Socrates? Frank speech, plain speech, fearless speech, unintimidated speech. Yes, it will get you in trouble. But just not any speech, but it's got to be rooted in the best of paideia. It's got to be rooted in the best of deep education. But the soul craft that I already was shaped in before I arrived at Harvard 48 years ago was one that engaged a kind of culture shock. Because even then, I was running into young brothers and sisters of different colors who were thoroughly convinced that the end and aim of life was, for the most part, to be the smartest in the room. And I said to myself, we come from a different tradition. I don't fetishize smartness, just like I don't worship meritocratic formulations. Now, I'm not promoting stupidity. I want to be clear about that. No, we got to let the phones be smart. We got to be wise. Let the computers be smart. We got to be courageous. Nothing wrong technological ingenuity. Nothing wrong with magnificent breakthroughs. But the question is, in the end, what kind of human being are you in your short trek from your mama's womb to tomb? And are you willing to engage in paideia at the deepest level, which has to do with your soul, your character? It has to do with the kind of person you will be and what will be said about you when your body is in that coffin or after your ashes are spread over whatever body of water that you so desire. What does it mean to be human? That Latin humando, which means burial. We're on our way to burial. The culinary delight of terrestrial worms. What I love about the black tradition is that we always believe in trying to keep it funky, which means we're highly suspicious of deodorized discourse. That's crucial. Sanitized discourse. Look at how they sanitize Martin every January. Sterilized Malcolm. Mainstream all of these freedom fathers. Never confuse a love warrior and a freedom fighter with a polished professional. Because most polished professionals fetishize smartness and end up being well-adjusted to injustice and well-adapted to indifference. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say with such tremendous insight, indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. So no matter how smart you are, no matter how rich you are, if you're not willing to engage in paideia, frank speech, a plain speech, it doesn't have to be public. It could be microsocial, on the job, in your synagogue, in your mosque, in your trade union, in your university. A force for good, in the language of John Coltrane. That's what it means to bring to bear the best of black history. And I keep saying the best because black history includes black gangsters, black thugs. Every community has it. Black haters, black xenophobes, black patriarchs, black homophobes, black transphobes. I got many in my family. People ask me all the time, how could you call Donald Trump a gangster on TV every 2 weeks? I said, because he is. But I'm not engaging in name calling. A gangster is not a subjective expression, that's an objective condition. It's true. If you grabbing private parts of somebody, that's gangster. Another country got oil and you say you ought to get it? That's gangster. You see, as I said before, I'm a revolutionary Christian, which means that I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. So when I call Trump a gangster, I'm talking about something inside of me. Trump is American as cherry pie. It's misogyny and white supremacy and transphobia and class arrogance and obsession with smartness, obsession with riches, ignorance flowing in the name of his claim to be smartness. He doesn't have a monopoly on that. Comes out of a long history. And black folk always keep track of it. And this is one of the challenges to a place like MIT and Harvard and others. Because one of the distinctive features of most American institutions is that we're in denial of the catastrophic and obsessed with the problematic. So everything's reduced to a problem rather than a catastrophe. There's never been such a thing as the race problem in America. There's been a series of catastrophes visited on black people. That's not a problem. No such thing as a woman's problem. There's been a catastrophe, a series of visited on women, working class people. The labor problem. No. That's from the vantage point of capital. That's from the vantage point of Wall Street. We're talking about the workers themselves dealing with daily life, wrestling with catastrophic circumstances. No such thing as an immigrant problem. I was in Arizona just a couple of days ago. Everybody's so upset. Mexicans coming in. Shoot, Arizona used to be Mexico. What you talking about? They just coming home. The Mexican War, one of the most trumped up, unjustified wars. And that's from the memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant. We're not talking about a radical anti-imperialist like Mark Twain. We're talking about somebody who fought in the war. He said this was a bogus war. This was a land grab, a power grab. That's what imperialism is. That's what the expansion of U.S. empire is. It's what it has been at its worst. We always want to keep track of the best and the worst. Any tradition, any group, the best inside it, the best of me, the worst of me. Now, what does that have to do with institutional provincialism? It means that from the very beginning, as we enter the dialogue, we first enter the dialogue with what we could call loosely hermeneutical humility. That the various interpretations that we put forward ought to be put forward in such a way that we recognize that we could be wrong as well as right. And we take each other seriously when we acknowledge that each one of us could be wrong or right. That's what it means to be a jazz woman or a blues man. To learn how to lift your voice, but also to listen. Not just hear an abstract, but listen. Because paideia, education, is about what? Transformation. Cheap schooling, just information. Never confuse the two. Information, indispensable. Information, necessary, not a sufficient condition for paideia. And hermeneutics, interpretation, self-invested interpretation. So when you talk about catastrophe, you begin with ecological catastrophe. Impending, escalating every day. Nuclear catastrophe. Increasing, especially with both Kim and Trump. Two gangsters. Possibility, pushing the button. We haven't even talked about Russia and other countries with nuclear arms. What a bleak moment. Economic catastrophe. What is it now? The top 3 individuals in this empire have wealth equivalent to 50% of our fellow citizens, 160 million people. Well, Brother West, they're very smart and they worked hard. Oh, please. Please. Salute their smartness, their intelligence. We're talking about structures. We're talking about institutions in place. We're talking about policies that generate massive redistribution of wealth from poor and working people to the well-to-do. When I was the age of many of the young brothers and sisters who are undergrads right now at MIT, and we were struggling against the 1%, they had 21% of the wealth. Today, 1% got 41% of the wealth. That's a massive redistribution of wealth upward. And it continues. Under Obama, 1% of the population got 95% of the income growth. People ask me why I was upset with the black president. Please. I love blackness, but not enough to blind me and render me insensitive to the suffering of poor working people. I don't care what color. And I'm stuck with the old-fashioned view that a precious baby in Yemen or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Somalia has the same value as a vanilla baby in Newtown, Connecticut, or a red baby in Standing Rock, or a brown baby on the east side of Los Angeles, or a black baby in Dorchester. Same value. Same righteous indignation, same moral outrage when innocent people are being killed. It could be a drone strike. It could be a police man or woman. It could be a fellow citizen. Innocent folk killed. A precious Jewish baby in Tel Aviv has exactly the same value as a precious Palestinian baby in the West Bank or in Gaza, and vice versa. And if you really believe that, then it's going to pit you over against much of the mainstream discourse. And I think that's exactly what paideia at its best does. That's why we love Socrates at a distance. We love the intellectual operation. We don't love the hemlock moment. That's why we love Amos, the legacy of Jerusalem, and Jeremiah. That's why we love Jesus and Muhammad, in the world but not of it, willing to keep track of forms of provincialism and parochialism, narrow horizons, narrow-mindedness, the lack of what the great Jane Austen called constancy. What is constancy? Moral and spiritual consistency. So you're not obsessed with just one issue. Concerned just about racism, can't say a mumbling word about misogyny and sexism. Concerned about patriarchy, can't say a mumbling word about transphobia, our precious transphobia. Or concerned about America, and can't say a mumbling word about imperial policies, the 4,857 military units that we have, 857 around the world, 145 countries we have U.S. special operations in, and keep track of what they're doing, from detentions to night raids to so forth and so on. That's a major challenge. It's a crucial challenge. All of us fall short. Samuel Beckett is right. Try again, fail better. He puts in this last piece of fiction, worst word whole. Try again, fail better. But right now, at the moment of this empire, we are witnessing colossal, escalating failure. Failure of imagination, failure of sensitivity, failure of concern with the vulnerable. And yet, certain institutions, the Harvard, MIT, University of Chicago's, flourishing. So the question becomes, MIT, what you gonna do? And by MIT, we're not talking about abstract institution. We're talking about the folk who constitute this place. What kind of human beings are you gonna choose to be? What levels of discipline? What kinds of attention? William James, the most adorable of all public intellectuals in the history of this empire. He used to say, experiences very much define what you attend to. There's a wonderful book by Tim Wu called The Attention Merchants, just published a couple of years ago. All of the institutional efforts to try to make sure that we don't attend to the things that matter, the advertising, enterprises and so forth, all tied to money making, all tied to profit maximizing, all tied to growth without necessarily defining what the moral and spiritual quality of that growth is vis-a-vis the planet in which we find ourselves, or vis-a-vis those Frantz Fanon called the wretched of the earth. Catastrophe. I used to acknowledge to my beloved colleagues in the philosophy departments. I said, if somebody dropped down from Mars and talked about the crisis of the American empire, would your subject matter have anything to do with that? Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, Charlottesville today, white supremacy, escalating, running amok. Are these departments wrestling with the vicious legacies of white supremacy? Oh, well, we've got somebody teaching a course on diversity. Well, that's not that. No, that's not that. No, that's not what I'm talking about. No, diversity is part of the deodorized discourse I'm talking about. Nothing wrong with it. All bureaucrats need constructs. But on the ground, diversity is about male supremacy and its vicious effects. It's about white supremacy and its vicious consequences. It's about class privilege, which even in a highly colorful silo, a highly colorful context, the issue of class cannot be downplayed. Same is true with empire. Catastrophe. For me, someone who teaches at Divinity School and Afro-American Studies, the issue of soulcraft, the issue of moral and spiritual dimensions of our individual lives, of our collective lives, sits at the center of it. Because there will be no fight back. And I'm very much concerned about fight back. There will be no fight back if we don't produce people who are willing to take a stand willing to take a stand. Emerson talks about this in Self-Reliance. Right? The aversion to conformity, the willingness to stand out and stand for, over against a status quo that so often is so preoccupied with reproducing itself that it takes a major catastrophe or crisis for it to acknowledge, lo and behold, it ought to come to terms with some realities that are being hidden and concealed. The moral and spiritual dimensions. And that's a challenge to all of my brothers and sisters here of all colors at MIT. How do you not just talk about it, but enact a sensitivity to the vulnerable in your curriculum, in your own praxis, in your organizational affiliations? No one of us can do everything. No one of us is Messiah. We've got one life to live. But it's got to be part and parcel of the soul craft. Now, Walt Whitman called it democratic soul craft vis-a-vis a market-driven soul craft. I would submit that the neoliberal soul craft has become so hegemonic these days, it's hard to think outside of it. And the neoliberal soul craft is what I said before. The smartest and the richest. That's all you need. That's all you need. You notice, for example, when you watch television, how many times people use the word obviously, obviously, obviously this, obviously that, obviously, and it's not obvious sometimes at all. I said to myself, some linguist needs to engage in an anthropological investigation as a deployment of that word, because it's a word of in-crowd smartness. Because if it's not obvious to you, then you're the one who feel dumb. And it's not just a word to connect other words. It's a way of wanting to be included in the smart crowd. And I thank God that I was raised in such a way that I have a deep suspicion of folk who are just smart. Because there's a whole lot of smart misogynists out there. A whole lot of smart folk who hate Jews and hate Arabs. And they got a long history of smart white supremacists. Very smart, sophisticated, well-read. But crushed my grandmama. And I said, oh, I got my hermeneutics of suspicion, not just hermeneutics, humility. I'm very, very Socratic in terms of my willingness to question what kind of assumptions and presuppositions are being put forward by those who are denying catastrophic realities and claim to be so smart, involved in problem solving. And I'm not against problem solving. I come out in some ways of tradition of American pragmatism of a certain kind that's obsessed with problem solving. But I come from a people whose first experience in the modern world is massive catastrophe. It's been at work ever since. Continues today. And usually the country doesn't attend to it unless there is a major challenge. Often of a violent sort. When I arrived at Harvard in 1970, they admitted 91 black students. 4 years earlier, they admitted six. And you say, oh, they had an intellectual renaissance in the black community, huh? All of a sudden, they just started admitting all these black folk. No, you had massive rebellions on April 5th, 1968, when Brother Martin Luther King Jr. was shot down like a dog on that porch in Memphis. 150 cities burning. Almost shut down the White House or de-whitified the White House or blackenized the White House. First time they had to use the National Guard to protect the White House since the 19th century. And then these institutions said, I think we really do have a problem. We're going to have to do something about this. We need some diversity programs. Oh, my God. These black folk running out of control. And then what happens the next month? September. New York Times Magazine, model minority, Asian brothers and sisters. Oh, we like them. They're so silent and seemingly deferential. They're not like Jamal and Letitia. No, Brother Kim, No, no, sister, no, no. Well, they don't know nothing about the history of Asian peoples. It's a construct, juxtaposed and contrasted with this rebellious folk, angry black people. No, no, we want those minorities that come in very, very quiet. Don't want to raise too much hell. Just want to fit in and assimilate. Now, you don't know what they're doing when they get home. You say, oh, you bring in the Indian brothers and sisters and Indochina, Japan, and Korean. They're gonna put the Koreans and the Japanese together. Please read the history. Oh God, imperial vicious. All of them under the same construct in America. That's the deodorized discourse. Asians, no, they got specificity. They got heterogeneity, vast diversity. Gonna put them all under, but juxtapose it to these black folk, because they're the ones out of control. How come? Because they will straighten their backs up and they'll tell some truths at their best. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a long history of black assimilation. Long history of black folk getting in, so glad to get in, smiling, laughing when it ain't funny, scratching when it don't itch, wearing the mask just to fit in. Paul Lawrence Dunbar talked about that. We wear the mask just to fit in. No, we got a history of misfits. History of those who are oppositional, not for opposition's sake, but because they are fundamentally committed to a form of democratic soulcraft that puts a premium on integrity, constancy, honesty, courage, fortitude. Fortitude, according to the Romans, is the fusion of courage and magnanimity, of courage and greatness of character, fortitude. Now, I would argue, in fact, and I'm going to stop because we're going to have dialogue on this, that when you talk about soulcraft in this country, you have to talk about the arts. I was glad to see the arts program. Well, it was up there. I saw the arts program here at MIT. Because the last thing you want is a lot of nerdy brothers and sisters running around being smart with no access to the arts. That is a dystopia of grand proportion. By the arts, I'm talking about the music, the paintings, and so forth and so on. They're not ornamental or decorative. They ought to be constitutive. And you can't talk about the history of white supremacy in this country without talking about resistance to white supremacy. And music has been, the musical tradition has been the grandest example, because it's there where you get more of the truth-telling. It's there where you get the vulnerability. It's there where you get the risks and so forth and so on. It's one of the reasons why when I began talking about Coltrane, I could have talked about Donny Hathaway. I could have talked about Aretha Franklin. I could have talked about Mahalia Jackson or Curtis Mayfield. Hard these days to keep track of the enhancing impact of black music on black folk and others. There's been a spiritual warfare against young black folk especially, to make sure that the music is not sweet and kind and gentle. We just lost Dennis Edwards. You all know who Dennis Edwards was? From Alabama? My dear brother. There you go. Brother, you looking sharp, though. Give it up for this. Give it up for this brother. He looking sharp. He looking sharp. He comes out of Alabama, from Mighty Clouds of Joy, and he replaced a David Ruffin from Why Not, Mississippi, who sang lead for the Temptations. Well, what was it about the Temptations or the Miracles? What was it about the main ingredient? What was it about the Delphonics or the Dramatics or the Jones Girls? What was it about the Hutchison Sisters of the Emotions? What was it about the groups who sang in tune with a sweetness and a kindness that stirred the soul rather than just stimulated the body? And these days, the dumbing down of the music is part and parcel of the dumbing down of the soul that makes it difficult to produce persons who are willing to fight, who are willing to sacrifice. Because if it's all about stimulation and titillation, you see, when Otis Redding said, try a little tenderness, that's not say my name, say my name, say my name. It's a very different disposition toward the world. It's very different orientation toward the world. And there is no black history without a love of truth, and the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak, anybody's suffering. There's no black history without a love of goodness, keeping track of the evil, the undeserved harm. A love of beauty, and Rilke is right. Beauty is, in fact, produced wrestling with terror and trauma and transfiguring your pain and suffering into a sound, a painting, a building. And there's certainly no love of the holy. For those of us who are religious, be you Muslim or Buddhist or Christian or whatever you are, there's no love of the holy without wrestling with the degree to which we are aspiring but fall short, tied to something bigger than ourselves. One of the reasons why I spend a lot of time in studios with hip-hop artists is to try to convince them that to fall in love with truth and beauty and goodness, to be a love warrior at the highest level, and then master your craft, then master your technique, then be as smart as you want to be, acknowledging the limitations of smartness, spilling into wisdom. Then we have a chance to deal with the catastrophe. That was what was beautiful about the Occupy movement. That was beautiful about the various marches we've had recently against Donald Trump. Beautiful about movement for black lives, and beautiful what would be the right words? The rich ecological movement, my dear brother McKibben and Naomi Klein and the others. And I know many have played an important role here at MIT as professors and staff and students. But the challenge is, given this institutional context, can we wrestle with the forms of provincialism, parochialism? Can we be true to the best of the Socratic legacy of Athens? Can we be true to the best of the prophetic legacy of Jerusalem? Can we be true to the best of the democratic legacy of not just the United States, but other social experiments as we keep track of empire, white supremacy, misogyny, transphobia, all of those ideologies that lose sight of the preciousness and pricelessness of each and every one of us. Thank you all so very much, and we'll have a nice little time to talk. Thank you very much. Oh.